up, guys? So I just want to go over rounding real quick with you. We are going to take a look at rounding to the nearest tens, hundreds, and thousands, okay? And these hints will always be here for you. I said I'm not going to really try to teach tricks, but I want you to always remember these hints down here. It says 5 or more, add one more to the rounding digit, and we're going to talk about what the rounding digit is here in a second. 4 or less, we're going to leave the rounding digit, we're going to leave it alone. We're just not going to change it, okay? And then it says everything behind the rounding digit becomes a 0, okay? So, in your notes, please take notes on this. Alright, let's write rounding, alright, on our notes line. And our first problem, okay? Let's go over this one right here, 2,642. And let's round that to the nearest, let's round that to the nearest 100. Okay? So I need to go find the nearest 100. Alright, so already I know, well, let's just think about it. Whenever I round to the nearest 100, all of my hundreds, what do you know about hundreds? What's always going to be in the ones and tens place in the hundreds? You're always going to have, so if I count my hundreds, I got 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000, 1,000, 100, and so on, right? What's always going to be in your ones and tens place? Think about it. It's always going to have a 0 in your ones and tens place. Same thing with here. So if I'm rounding to the 100, whatever my answer is, it better not have anything other than a 0 or a 10, or sorry, a 0 in the ones place and tens place, right? Okay, so let me show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so first of all, we're going to go underline the rounding digit, okay? So the rounding digit right here, the hundreds place, is going to be the 6, alright? That is what my rounding digit is going to be called. You're going to say that a lot, your rounding digit, okay? This digit right here in the hundreds place, the 6, I'm either going to add one more to it, make it a 7, or I'm going to leave it alone and leave it at 6, right? Okay. So, now, let's set up a number line so we can actually see, because rounding is all about what is that number in between, right? And in this case, what two hundreds is that number in between, okay? So let's find that out on a number line. So, I want to find out my endpoints here on my number line. So draw your number line, okay? And let's make 2 endpoints. So, and I'll tell you what this number is between, what two hundreds, okay? Now the 2,000 right here, we're not even going to touch the 2,000, okay? So go ahead and put the 2,000 down on each one of your endpoints, okay? Now we said this 6 in the hundreds place here is either going to bump up to 7 or we're going to leave it alone. So check this out. We said it's either going to bump up to 7 or we're going to leave it alone to a 6, okay? And what do we know? Well, about the 100. Anytime I round to the 100, what's always going to be in your ones and tens place? It's always going to be a 0, right? So, we know that in our, when we round to the hundreds, in our ones and tens place is always going to be a 0, right? So, I just made the endpoint. So, 2,642, it goes in between these two hundreds. 2,600, which that is 100, because if I count by 100, will I hit 2,600? Yeah, I will. Alright, so then it's going to be, so it's either going to be between 2,600 or between 2,700. Okay, and that's 100 too. If I count by 100, I will hit that number eventually, right? So this number goes somewhere in between these two, okay? Now, I need to find out, the last thing I need to find out on my number line is what's my middle, okay? What goes right in the middle between them? The easiest way to figure this out is you're always going to have a 5 that's going to go somewhere. So here's what I mean. We know we're going to have 2,650 is going to be your middle, okay? And here's an easy way to remember this, okay? In between 0 and 100 on the number line, what goes right in the middle? 50, right? So anytime you're doing anything rounded to the hundreds, you're always going to have that 50 in the middle, right? You see the 50 right here? Okay. Now I know we got a much bigger number, but you're always going to have a 50 that goes right in the middle, okay? So now I need to decide this number. Does it go on the left side somewhere over here, or does it go on the right side somewhere over here? Okay, once you get to this point, it's probably pretty easy to tell. 2,642, it's going to go somewhere over here. It's actually going to be pretty close to 2,650, right? Because the 42 is before the 50 over here, okay? So this number is going to go right around here. Let's pretend it goes right, not pretend, it goes somewhere over here. All right, so is it going to be closer? And that's what rounding is all about. What 100 is it closer to? Is it closer to this 100? And the reason I keep saying it's 100 is because if we count by 100, we will get to 2,600, okay? So is it closer to 2,600? Or is it closer to 2,700? Okay? And just by the number line, you can tell it's going to be closer to 2,600, okay? Now, also, down here by your hints, we have this 6 right here, okay? It's either going to bump up or stay the same. In this case, it stayed the same, right? And the reason, and what you probably learned last year, is if we look to the right, that 4 is going to help us out. That 4 is 4 or less, right? So, in this case, if it's 4 or less, we're going to leave the rounding digit, which the 6 is the rounding digit, okay? We're going to leave it alone, according to our rules, right? All right. Now, this is kind of the trick part I was talking about, okay? I mean, it's something good to have, but I also want you to know what we're really doing, okay? We're deciding that 2,642, it's closer to this 100, 2,600, than this 100, 2,700, okay? All right, so we will say the answer is 2,600. Now, for my hint again, do you remember when I said anytime you're rounding to the nearest 100, well, think about hundreds, right? 100, 200, 300, 400. Every time you have a 0 in your ones and tens place, right? Okay, so that's perfect. So now let's erase that and let's do another one. Okay, so I know on your little pre-assessment that we took today, you had some big numbers, okay? So let's do something big. Let's go 492. All right. So 263,492. Sorry about the black mark, but you can just 492. Okay. So let's go ahead and write that one down in your notes, and let's make us a new number line. Okay. Now, on our number line, the whole point of our number line is to find out what it goes in between. All right. Now on this one, let's go ahead and let's say we're going to round to the nearest 10. Okay. So we're going to round to the nearest 10. Alright? So the biggest thing here is if we're going to round to the nearest 10, our rounding digit is going to be in the tens place, right? So go underline, right now, before I do it, go underline your tens place and find out what your rounding digit is. Okay? So if I go to my tens place, my rounding digit is a 9, right? Okay, so that 9, I'm either going to bump up that 9, alright, or I'm going to leave that 9 alone. Okay. So let's go ahead and set up our number line. Okay, let's get 2 endpoints. Now, if I round it to the nearest tenth, what I am, that means if I count by tens, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, right? Every single one of those numbers, when I count by 10, what's in the ones place? 10, 20, 30. It's always going to be a 0, right? All right, so we know whatever our answer is going to be, if it's rounded to the nearest 10, we're going to have a 0 in our ones place, okay? So let's do this. Now, all of these numbers before the rounding digit, I'm not going to mess with. So we can go ahead and put those down. 263,400. And I'm going to stop there before we worry about our rounding digit. Okay? Actually, I'm going to go ahead and put those two. So 263,000. Okay? Now, this 9 we said is either going to bump up or we're going to leave it alone. Okay? Now, if it does bump up, what's going to happen? Because after 9, there is no more digit higher than it. After 9, we would have to bump up and make this a 5, right? So, if that has to bump up, we can't, there's no other digit above a 9, so this becomes a 0, and we bump this next place value over, okay? So it would look like this right here. 263,500 would be on this side. Okay? On this side, let's say if we leave it alone, 4, if we left, so with the 4 here, the 9 we'd leave alone. And then remember when I round to the tens, there's always going to be a 0 in the ones place, right? Okay? So I know this number goes somewhere in between these two values. Okay? Now I just need to find a middle. Alright? Remember what I said about a middle. So if I'm going between 0 and 10, what's my middle between 0 and 10? Well, right between 0 and 10 is 5, right? What's between 20 and 30? 25. What's between 50 and 60? 55, right? You gotta get the point. Every single time there's a 5 in the ones place. So what's between 80 and 90? 85, right? So I know definitely my number is going to be the same here. 263,490. You guessed it, 5. Alright, so that's my middle. So my endpoints are 263,490 to 263,500. And my middle is 263,495. So now we just need to decide where that number goes. Does it go over here to the right, or does it go over here to the left? Well, let's see. Where would you put basically this 492 part? Would 492 go in between here, or would that 492 go past the 495 right here? Okay. And I think we all can see that. It would definitely, this number would definitely go somewhere right on here, right? All right. So if it goes right there, is it closer? Which endpoint is it closer to? Okay. And I think we can all tell that it's closer to this endpoint right here. So our answer is 263,490. Whoa, get out of there. 490, right? And we know we're good right here because every time I round to there's 10, every time I count by 10, I always have a 0 in the ones place, right? 10, 20, 30, 40. So I know I'm good right here. All right. So I'm going to do one more. And remember our rules too. If we did that kind of little shortcut, okay, if I look to the right, the 2 is telling me what if I'm looking at kind of our hints? Well, the 2 is 4 or less. So I'm going to leave the rounding digit. I'm going to leave the rounding digit. I'm going to leave it alone. Okay? And then after I mess with it, everything after the rounding digit becomes a 0, right? So this is going to turn into a 0. All right? Those are huge hints. I want you to read over those, okay? I'm going to do one more. And just remember, everything behind your rounding digit becomes a 0. So, guys, if you're doing your rounding digit and everything behind it is not a 0, you're definitely going to be wrong, okay? All right, so we got one more. And then I think your homework, you got 5 problems to do on your exit ticket. All right, I got most of it here. Cool, let's do one more. Let's do 47,824. Okay. Now, let's step it up. Let's round this one to the nearest thousands. So nearest thousands. Okay. So I need to go underline what place value? I need to go underline the thousands place, right? Ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. Okay. So I'm looking at my thousands place, right? Okay. Let me show you the trick real quick. I don't want to show it, but we're going to be working on our number line really. Once I've proven that you understand the number line, then you can go do the trick all day long and make it quicker for yourself, right? But we have to understand the number line and why we're rounding. Remember I told a few of my classes today, stop being robots, right? A lot of kids can tell me what it means to round. They just know 5 or less equal 5 or less, we add one more, 4 or less, we leave it alone. And they can't tell me what that means, they just know that rule. That means we really don't understand rounding. We just know a trick, okay? And I want us to be better than that. I want us to understand why we round. We round to find which 10, which 100, or which 1,000 these numbers are closest to, okay? So, if I'm looking at, let's go ahead and do the endpoints real quick. Okay, so draw your number line. Now, you should be almost able to do this number line on your own. So try it out. Okay, now the 4 in the 10,000s place, I'm not going to mess with, so I'm going to put the 4 down on each side in my 10,000s place. All right. Now, what do we know about this 7? Well, it's the rounding digit, so always when we're round, the rounding digits either we're going to add one more or we're going to leave it alone, right? So your endpoints should show you adding one more or you leaving it alone, right? Okay, you see that? So my rounding digit, we said we're either going to add one more or we're going to leave it alone. That right there sets your endpoints, okay? Now, everything behind the rounding digit, we said is going to end up becoming a 0. So everything behind our rounding digit is going to be a 0. Now, the way to check yourself is, if I count by 1,000, right, nearest 1,000, if I count by 1,000, will I eventually hit 47,000? Absolutely. It'll take me a while, but I'll hit 47,000. If I count by 1,000, will I eventually hit 48,000? Yeah. Okay. So let me now set my endpoint. Remember, let's start real slow. So if I'm at 0 and I'm at 1,000, what's right in the middle between 0 and 1,000? Okay, it's 500. Remember that 5 is all the way somewhere, right? In the middle, you're always going to have 5 somewhere, one of those. So in between 0 and 1,000 is 500. What's in between 1,000 and 2,000? 1,500. Here we go. What's in between 2,000 and 3,000? 2,500. Right? Good point. So in between this, if I'm counting up this way, the middle is going to be 47,500. These are thousands, right? In between here, all the way to here is 1,000. So in the middle is going to be my 500. All right. Now I just need to decide, where would that number go on this number line? Well, it's 47,800. 800. Ooh, so is 800 going to be below the 5 or bigger than the 5? Yeah, 800 is definitely going to be, I don't know, somewhere right on here, right? And we're not being exact. So just as long as you know, hey, that is going to go on the left side somewhere. So if it goes on the left side, here's what rounding's all about. What is that? Which 1,000 is that closest to? Is 47,824 closest to? Is it closer to this 1,000 or is it closer to this 1,000? And I think we all agree, just by where it's at on the number line, that it's closer to this 1,000, 48,000, right? So our answer is 48,000. Okay? Remember what I said about anytime you round its number to the nearest 1,000, you are always going to have what in your 100, tens, and ones? You are always going to have a 0. Anytime I count by 1,000, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, you always have a 0 in your 100, tens, and ones. Okay? So that's our answer. If we did kind of trick way, once we really understand, you look to the right of the rounding digit will tell you this 8 is 5 or more, so we're going to add one more to the rounding digit, right? So we're going to add one more to our rounding digit, and what does everything become behind the rounding digit? Everything behind the rounding digit becomes a 0. What I was telling last year is basically we get help from our neighbor, right? And then we kick our neighbor out. It becomes a 0. So we get the help, and then everything behind the rounding digit becomes a 0. And I don't know if you can see it very well, but okay. So the 8's telling us to bump up, and then everything behind the rounding digit becomes a 0. Okay. So I want you to try it out tonight. You got 5 problems. I want you to set up the number line. Okay. Go back and watch this video on how I set up the number line and how I found the middle. All right. And then we'll see how you did tomorrow. All right. Thanks.